As you can imagine, putting an event on like this requires a number of folks. You met many of them at the registration table. I wanted to give a special shout out before we get started. Last year we thanked people at the end, but I know how these days work. You sort of trickle out and get called into other sessions. So I wanted to ask Tiffany to come up. Tiffany Simon is the one that coordinated not only the logistics of this event, but the entire program and was herding cats with all the rest of us to make sure that we had the right people here to deliver the message. So I just wanted to say thank you, Tiffany.
Thank you.
Okay, we're going to go ahead and get kicked off, or I'm going to trip on these tripwires here. Can everybody hear me okay? Sound check? Okay, good. I guess I'll just walk down the list. And I have some questions, as I mentioned. I have questions for the panel. I'm going to grab a seat up here in just a minute. But I wanted to introduce the panel members. We'll have a few questions that I will moderate, and then again, be prepared because I'm going to ask you to fire away at us up here. First of all, Allison Acevedo, Assistant Commissioner for the Office of Leasing. Flavio Perez, Assistant Commissioner for Real Property Utilization and Disposal. Right? I got it. Andrew Heller, Assistant Commissioner for Facilities Management. Keith Kalala, you are Director of Project Delivery Excellence, Office of Design and Construction. Laura Stagner was unable to attend today, so I appreciate Keith being able to step up and answer the tough questions about projects that are ongoing or being planned. And I'm Stuart Burns. I'm the Assistant Commissioner for Portfolio Management and Customer Engagement. So I'm going to get started with, who's my random victim here? I think Andrew. Okay, Andrew, most of the customers here probably would agree that facilities management is one of the GSA functions that touches literally every single federal employee. Tell us what you're focusing on to make FM programs more efficient. For example, I understand you're reviewing O&M delegations.
Sure.
So, yep. Oh, are you mic'd up?
Yeah. Sorry about that. So I will do my best to speak into the mic here. Good morning, everybody. Great to see lots of folks here in the room. So a couple of things that we're up to in facilities, and I should probably mention that I'm still relatively new to the job, about 8 months, and probably bring a little bit of a different perspective to it, just based on my background, than maybe facilities has traditionally had. So a couple of things that we're focused on really are consistency and efficiency in the way that we do things. I'm really here representing more than 2,000 facility managers, lease administration managers, across PBS, who essentially serve as the face to our customers on a day-to-day basis, and we take that role very seriously. As I travel around the country, meet with our folks, with customer agencies, one of the things that we hear the most is, it can be a little bit inconsistent in the way that GSA delivers services to our customers in different parts of the country. So we're really focused on identifying what our core functions and processes are, bringing more consistency to those functions, and doing so really in the most efficient way possible. That's just not meaning by the number of people that we have managing buildings. The way that we do manage buildings today, because the technology is a lot different than it was 10, 15, 20 years ago, and is going to continue to evolve. We need to adapt our workforce to meet those changing needs, but also efficiency in the way that we acquire services from our partners in the private sector, operations and maintenance services, custodial services, the things that make your experience in a GSA building good or bad on a day-to-day basis. So we've implemented a national specification for operations and maintenance services. Also in the crux of developing a national specification for custodial services, to bring a little bit more consistency to the way that we're delivering those things to you. Also, looking at the way that we contract for those services and doing so, in the most efficient manner we can. consolidating contracts where it makes sense to do so, putting more responsibility on our operations and maintenance vendors, making them our partners, eliminating redundant contracts where we're paying for things that the operations and maintenance contractor could be doing for us, and leveraging the fact that they're already in the building. Aggregating contracts between buildings where there's a geographic proximity, and a business justification to do so, and then really looking at extending our contract terms. We found that we certainly don't want to give a vendor sort of a 10-year run with no checks and balances, but going with a short base with a series of option periods that extend out to 10 years really gives that vendor more of a feel that they're a partner with us and have a stake in the game and take more pride in operating those buildings. So I would say it really does come down to consistency and efficiency in the way that we deliver services.
Thanks. Our commissioner, I've heard his speech a number of times, so I'm going to give a little bit of it since he's not going to be here today. This is about, his focus has been about mission and money. This is about meeting the mission of the federal government with respect to housing in the most efficient way possible. And he's got 3 themes that that run through everything that we're up to in our strategic plan and in our objectives and our goals for the next year plus. First thing we're doing is strategic capital investment, which I'm going to talk about in a minute. Second thing we're focused on is lease cost avoidance, and I'm going to ask Allison to talk a little bit about that. The third one is PBS productivity. Those 3 initiatives are being pursued by everybody up here. We're trying to make ourselves more efficient on behalf of the American taxpayer. We're trying to get into better lease deals to save money in the lease market. And we're trying to make sure that the few dollars that we have to invest in strategically in the portfolio are being spent on the top priorities of you, our customer base. So I'm going to ask Allison to talk a little bit about the lease cost avoidance initiative.
Thanks, Stuart. Yeah, definitely, if saving money through leasing or avoiding costs through leasing is a priority of yours, we're immediately aligned, because that's definitely what Dan Matthews came to PBS to do. In his former role, he saw a lot of extensions, lease extensions, costly extensions, and footprints where we were way oversized. And the agenda really has been talking to everyone that occupies those spaces to talk about how we can help work together on reducing the RSF during the requirements phase, and then how we can quickly put that requirement out to the market and negotiate lower cost deals below market. So reducing the RSF, which we've been doing for years, continue a focus on that, implementing workplace strategies that might work best for you and the way your people perform their work, and then figuring out the best acquisition platform so we're in there negotiating great deals. We have data, we've collected a lot of data that tells us on average we stay in our leases over 21 years. So we also know that a longer term lease, we get a lower rate. So as we look at each individual bureau, each agency, we actually have that analysis that we can talk with you about as we're setting those terms. And we also have data where we can look at what a 15-year firm, 10-year firm, and an 8-year firm would get you through our advanced automation acquisition platform, AAAP. So when you talk about cycle time, that is always an issue that we're working on, because it helps us factor in what acquisition platform we need to be using, and also how best to get in there to avoid the extension. We've had a lot of success with the AAAP platform in terms of reduction in cycle time. So for our mid and lower cost deals, we're really pushing the AAAP platform because we're shaving off 6 to 12 months in the average lease acquisition process. AAAP, I know, hasn't been terribly popular with customers, but I know through hopefully some of our tutorials and working more hand in hand with you and your facilities folks, we can get to figuring out how best AAAP can work again on those mid to low value leases. We actually have a workshop or group out here that we'd love to talk to you if you have any questions about AAAP today. The other thing that we're real focused on is our broker services contract. And soon we'll be putting our 4th generation broker services contract out to the market, the RFP. And what we've done with that new scope of work is we have enhanced requirements development as well as enhanced post-award services. We're finding a lot of the time, on the front end, we're not necessarily diving in deep enough to capitalize on the potential RSF reduction, so utilizing the broker expertise there in the planning phase. And a lot of times we lose time, sometimes control of the budget and the schedule post-award. So having the broker more engaged and working more closely with additional resources during post-award is also that we're looking forward to. So broker services definitely on the high risk, prospectus level projects, longer terms, and for the mid and lower value deals, really look into AAAP to accelerate the delivery of those leases. I think probably we're setting performance metrics around how best to achieve a greater lease replacement rate in terms of dollars, to avoid the extension, the holdovers, which the market tells us all the time. That's never a good thing for them in terms of tying up their capital and their assets. We really, they're in not a good situation at all. So we're trying to increase our lease replacement rate from around 50% to an 80% lease replacement rate in the next 2 years. So across the country with all the regional offices, that's really what we're striving to achieve. Starting the planning on time, identifying the right acquisition platform, and then delivering those projects within the budget and the schedule.
Thanks. So a quick shift here in thought. You see more chairs coming in, so if you're standing in the back, I'm not sure which is more uncomfortable because I've sat in these seats all day before. So I'm not sure if sitting in the seats is less comfortable than standing, but you have options open. I should also mention anybody who can't see or hear well, I think I mentioned earlier, there's a spillover room.
No, that's
Nope.
the problem.
Oh, that's the problem.
It's not working, YouTube.
Got it. YouTube feed
That's
is
why
working.
we're
There you go.
disrupting, I apologize.
Okay. So about half the money that you pay in rent, I want to do a little budget discussion here. About half the money you pay in rent flows through the lease market. About actually half our inventory at this point. We just are bringing those two lines together between the owned and the leased inventory. About half the money flows through there, and that's why it's a significant look and an initiative for our commissioner is to try to bring that number down a little bit. The thought being that the less money we spend as literally just a pass-through to the lease market, the more money we would have to invest in the infrastructure in the federal side. Managing capital on the owned side is really a two-pronged approach. One is investing in the properties that we are in and plan to stay in forever. The second is disposal, which I'm going to ask Flavio to talk about in a few minutes. But I wanted to talk a little bit about strategic capital investment. We bring in about nobody in the CFO is here, so they can't correct me, about $10.2 billion in rent revenue every year. About six of it, a little less than six of it, flows through the leasing inventory. On the other side is what it takes to run GSA, to run the facilities, and also what we invest in the infrastructure or new buildings that we're building. That side of our budget has been underfunded for the past, I think, 5 years now. And we have a known pin-up near-term liabilities of about $6 billion. Interestingly enough, the delta between what you pay in rent and what we're allowed to spend in the FBF has also been shortchanged by about $6 billion in total over the past 5 years. So we're looking really hard at where do we make the smartest capital investments. And right now, we're not going into buildings that have been sort of beaten down to the point that they need $150 million worth of renovation, because that takes out of our ability to do some critical infrastructure work like elevators and seismic reinforcements in other parts of the inventory. So we're taking a strategic look at our portfolio and saying, this is a segment of our inventory that we really don't have a long-term need for in this community, and maybe it makes more sense for us to just move and constrict what our requirements are in the federal government in that community and take that to the lease market and have the lease market meet those needs. In other areas, we're trying to make smart capital investment where we can do better utilization of the federal facilities. I mentioned this building, which underwent a very nice renovation, depending on which side of the building you came in on. Underwent a very nice renovation in a portion of it, and we've dramatically improved the efficient use of this building. We still have work to do, obviously, with the window shakers in the front of this building, but we know that there are places that we can make smart investments in the inventory to get better, longer-term use of these facilities. And that's what strategic capital investment is about. So in terms of the prioritization of that $6 billion worth of need in the federal inventory that we go through every year in putting our budget together, we have had a heavy slant recently toward those projects that support longer, more stable federal tenancy in the federal inventory. So we're right-sizing projects. We're not putting mahogany walls up all over the place and gold plating. We're doing smart investment in important infrastructure of the federal government for your long-term housing needs. And that's really what strategic capital investment is. So as we prioritize projects that we're investing in, we're looking for a return on investment. We're looking for investment in a community where we can perhaps take a 100-person lease on the other side of town and consolidate that with a balanced infrastructure approach on the owned side. And so that's where we're making our investments currently. I mentioned on the owned side there are two aspects. One is smart investment and better utilization of our existing inventory. The other is a recognition of the next tier of disposals, that we should be really not in the business of owning federal inventory in certain locations. I'm not going to go into too much detail, but I'm going to ask Flavio to talk about FASTA. The FASTA, I'm going to mess with the acronym, Federal Asset Sale and Transfer Act. Was that 2016?
Yeah, December 16.
December 16 passed, and it has taken quite a while to get it officially stood up and to get the board constituted. Now that that's happened, I'm going to ask Flavio to talk a little bit about the board, our work with the board, and where we're going with disposals and PBS.
Great, thanks, Stuart. You took most of my talking points. Well, the board was stood up finally on May 1st. So as Stuart mentioned, the law was signed in 2016. We're in 2019 now. May 1st, the board was stood up. Currently, there are 5 members of the board. We will have a session later today that John Dugan will lead that will get into the nitty-gritty and some of the nuances of the legislation. But in essence, what we're trying to do in disposal, we're a group of about 80 folks nationwide. I'm a service provider to all land-holding agencies. We're trying to position ourselves to help the board be successful and you all to be successful in this endeavor. So the board will probably sit in this building. They're going through, as you can imagine, several logistical challenges to begin with. They're trying to set up their .gov email addresses, getting computers, getting acquisition support, legal support, and what have you. It looks like they've identified an executive director to get going. They've also hired a staffer to help them set up a public meeting, which was just published in the Federal Register last Friday. They will have a public meeting on June 17th in the NCR auditorium. So we'll give you more information on that as this plays out. But really the board is focused very keenly on identifying assets for the first round of sales that was laid out in the FAFSA legislation. In essence, this first round allows us to take property directly to sale, where you don't have to screen for other federal uses, you don't have to screen for other public benefit uses. You can take it directly to sale, and the benefit of it is those funds, the proceeds from those sales, will be retained by the board and appropriated in future years with the goal of putting other projects forward towards this position. I can say the board does not have a chairperson yet. There's an acting chair. The chair has to be confirmed by the Senate. But I've met with the board a couple of times now, and I'm impressed by their energy. I think it's a good group of folks that from a broad background that are really looking to push this forward. As I said, it's really focused now on identifying properties for this first round. The goal is to dispose of proceeds in excess of $500 million. And they need to have this list compiled by October 1st. So those are just some quick dates of they started on May 1st, they need a list by October 1st that will be approved by OMB for sales of greater than $500 million. And we can get into them, have to answer questions here or in the breakout session with John.
Thank you. How many people here have an inventory that touches all 11 GSA regions? Consistency, consistency, consistency. One of the things, Andrew mentioned it, I think Keith's going to talk about it a little bit. One of the things that has been an area of focus for PBS and will continue to be is driving consistency into your experience across the country. We don't want a particular transaction in region X to be substantially different than a transaction in region Y. And I specifically use letters rather than numbers, so I wouldn't throw anybody under the bus. So the idea is that we want to drive a consistent experience for you so you can know what to expect. And part of that means we're trying to drive consistent policy out of central office. One of those areas in particular is a big ticket item for a lot of our customers, and that's the reimbursable work authorizations. Keith and I have partnered, because I manage the pricing policy, on really reinforcing the existing policy. It's not a change in policy, but I'm going to ask Keith to talk a little bit about direct charging. We'll start, I guess, first with what the RWA fee is supposed to cover, and then what it's not supposed to cover, and our move to make sure that we're driving a consistent approach toward direct charging for those, I'll use the term loosely, above standard services associated with an RWA.
Sure, thank you, Stuart. Hello, everybody. Yeah, so 3 points here. I'll talk about the background, about the RWA fees. Again, why is this happening? All this attention recently, and ultimately what it means to all of you. So a little background on the fees. If it's reimbursable, it's something that's above standard, right? Sounds pretty straightforward, but it's something that we have been funded for, i.e. appropriated for. I usually liken this to say we're a nonprofit organization. We're really not trying to make money, but just fully get reimbursed for supporting you to do your mission and the work that you need to do through us. And when you look at the fees, they're kind of broken down into 2 categories. One is indirect and one is direct. So let me focus on the direct first, because that's a little bit more easier to understand sometimes. If you think about a medium complex project or a high-risk project that often has an AE firm, architecture engineering firm, right, where we go to a contractor, that's a direct cost, right, that you see on your RWA. Seems straightforward, right? A lot of projects that have construction quality managers on those projects, again, would be another example where we either go to a contracted firm and or maybe a GSA person may provide that, and if they do, they become the direct charge that you would see as a line item on your RWA. On the indirect portion of this is more the cost of doing business. So how do we figure that out? It's an estimate. We predict it, we forecast it, and we've been looking at this for the last 5 to 7 years. It's been an exhaustive effort to really take a look at what we take in and to see if we want to make the program overall net neutral. Again, going back to the point, we're not trying to make any money here. Unfortunately, we've been on the other end, and we're level setting it a bit. But we're doing some great efficiency along the way. So let me get to the next bullet, which is why this is happening now, and talk a bit about fee reform as we're calling it. We're taking on a number of initiatives. So we didn't want to just look at our budget, income, outcome, make it kind of, direct report to our commissioner and say, all right, set the fee at this amount and we'll all be happy to go home. We said there's an opportunity here for us, right, to get more efficient. So the first thing we're focusing on is the express menu. How many folks have heard about that? Show of hands. Okay, well good, this is your opportunity of something coming your way that's pretty exciting. We went through those 12,000 RWAs we get a year on average, which is about 1.2 billion. At any point we have 4 to 5 billion of this work. And we said, wait a minute, why do we have to sit there and figure this stuff out? Aren't we getting repeatable, recurring things? When you look at that portfolio of the work, probably 50 to 80% of that work is below 50,000. This is kind of the bread and butter stuff that you come to us for, carpeting, painting, door locks. And we said, let's anticipate. Let's not wait for you all to ask us for it. And we broke it down into about 8 to 10 categories, came up with about 350 line items, went to a contractor and said, let's get a good scope and narrative, and put a tool together. So we're currently in the process, I'm happy to say, to make sure all of our regions are going to meet with their acquisition director. They've committed to put it in a vehicle. So express, if it's one of these items, we don't have to think about planning requirement development. Cost management, right? And I'm going to be talking about that later on. GSA, can you do a better job, consistent, better estimates, range of accuracy? Well, if you pick an express item, it should be pretty close to the range of accuracy that PM or property manager tells you in the field. And then the time cycle. Unfortunately, we've looked at these smaller transactions. I think we talked about this last year, and they take us quite a while to do. Well, if it's one of these express items, the probably should get that really quick. The second item, and we're kind of dusting this off, is the micro purchase. I'm going to ask another question. How many folks are aware that you all have been delegated for micro purchases? Show of hands in your agency. Okay, so cool. So it sounds like we've got some attention. So I've been working with Vicki on Stuart's team, and we're doing a couple things here. We're drawing awareness and visibility to that. And I want to use a parallel here that this is kind of like, the Macy's Santa of, hey, go to Gimbals. So micro purchase, why would we give away our work, right? Well, that cost of doing business I mentioned, that indirect fee, every time we run a transaction through, it's got to go through RITA, right, our system, the contracting officers. There's all these built-in fixed expenses. Well, really, if it's below 2,000 and it's a door lock and your property manager says, yeah, okay, good to do, you guys can all do that. We can all save that collective fee that normally you would give to us. It's not an RWA, and you're allowed to do it. So we've really ramped up this effort. We're in the process now of going back to all of our customers and say, hey, in 2015, we offered this delegation. A, were you aware of it? B, did you redelegate it down to your folks? And what we're going to do internally is put it on our website. I'm working with Andrew Heller's group and Michael Lane with delegations for a one-stop shop so we can offer that amenities to you. The other one's e-RITA. We've got a big workshop on this. Hopefully you can catch it. You have to pick, though, either come to my cost management or with Ashley and e-RITA. We're going to drive to paperless. Again, there's great efficiency here by going paperless, but there's other benefits, huge benefits on that, on the project delivery end, and that is getting your work requests earlier. I've been working with a lot of the national clients to get what I call the portfolio projects up front. This allows us to look at all your work in advance, and you don't need the funding. You can actually put the work request in, we can track it, we can assign a project manager, and get much more time to work this work with you. And so direct charging, again, so that is one of the parts of this initiative that we're talking about. And as you can see, it was one part of the many parts of this whole fee reform. And again, we're trying to improve consistency on this. We also discovered through the process of training folks, and I wanted to present it here to you today if you hadn't heard that we're doing it. We're not only training our internal folks, but we have some client enrichment series. A lot of folks familiar with that, show of hands? So yeah, that's great. That's a great opportunity, right? So I encourage you to look forward to that. We're planning some sessions in the near future. And again, it's a clarification. I'm working with Stuart, as he mentioned. We're going to transfer, if you go back and look at the policy today, it's currently in the RWA policy, but it will be transferring into the pricing policy. But in any event, I think you'll be excited with the clarifications. And the last thing that we're doing with the fee in particular is what I call right-sizing the fee. This is something that's still ongoing. We're meeting with OMB now. And essentially what we're going to do is the larger transactions actually will get a discount. But as you can imagine, those really long, small projects, let's say $10,000, $20,000, it doesn't take a lot of time quickly to absorb a PM's time and the cost of doing business. So again, in the sense of setting that fee right, we're going to make those appropriate adjustments. We won't surprise you with this. I promise we'll give you plenty of notice. if and when we do make any changes to the fee itself and give you ample notification. So the third bullet, if you're tracking me here in the 3 points, is what does this mean to all of you? I alluded to some of that with the express menu. Hopefully you can get things a lot quicker. Can't say enough about that e-Rita in the sense of getting that work in early, and you don't need funding for it. Let us know about it. Assign a project manager instead of waiting until June, July, August. Tell us about your RWA. Tell us in October if you can. The other thing about the direct charging is I think you'll have options now. Understanding the clarification, I'd like to say the goal is for our internal folks and externally that we're both on the same page, that we say, hey, we both understand what's part of the fee and what should be direct charge. If we get to that point, then we can talk about options. And the quick option example I'll give you is we do a lot of work at the border stations. Some of those projects, I should say, below 100,000, let's say a simple paving project. In the past, maybe the project manager could do the specifications and drawings. If we went to an AE firm, it'd be X dollars. Well, your option now, knowing it should be direct charges, should we have the project manager do it? You might get a discount. So it's a healthy, meaningful conversation up front. For some of you, this might not be a change. And what I mean by that, if you work with one part of our organization, Special Projects Program Division, they're fully reimbursable. Everything they do is direct charge. So it's a standard way of doing business, but we do recognize in many regions, we just haven't had a lot of attention to this, so this is going to be new for you. So there you go. That's a little background, kind of why this is all happening in the greater sense of fee reform and what it means to you.
Thanks, Keith. All right, so I mentioned, excuse me, I mentioned when we started this morning, this session's designed to be interactive. So this is the interactive part of the raising your hand, which you've done a couple times. We just shot a lot of information at you across a broad spectrum of program areas. We have folks with microphones available. If you have questions for any of us up here, and if we have a lot of other people in the room, so if we can't answer it, maybe we can grab somebody who can. Like to hear what's on your mind or what questions, concerns you have. I see one hand already. Good.
Hi, good morning. Thank you. Can you guys speak more specifically to how you are going to make the service consistent across all the different regions of GSA?
So I will talk from my program area. So I manage portfolio, the portfolio strategy, and customer engagement. One of the things that we've done within our business line is we've established more of an oversight role from central office. You know, traditionally, as I watch GSA from the outside and also now from the inside, I watched the balance of approach and power sort of shift back and forth from regions to central office and back to regions. We're still trying to find the appropriate middle ground. We recognize that every transaction is nuanced. This transaction is completely different from the other one. What we're trying to do is make sure that our policies are consistent, and we're going out and doing internal audits to say, are you uniformly applying the policy that we've set forth from a central office perspective? And to be candid, we're not 100% there yet by any stretch, but it is a focus area, certainly within portfolio and customer engagement.
So one of the things when I talked about leasing and replacing only 50% of our leases on time and the goal of getting up to 80%, we also found that we had a lack of staffing in order to run our leasing projects like a project, like we tend to do in our federal projects, especially our capital construction projects. So we really have a renewed emphasis on, Stuart talked about policy, standard policy interpretation, and I'm talking about the practice, the project management practice, where you start with the project manager, assign your core team, develop a plan, set forth your outcomes, and applying that same discipline to the leasing portfolio that I think we've gotten down pretty well on the capital, on the federal side of the portfolio. And we actually, through a workload analysis, came up with a proposal of a surge in the workforce to apply directly to those leasing projects across the country, broken down into every region. So we made the pitch to OMB, and it's in the president's budget where it's pending congressional approval. But in order to really apply that standard practice on the leasing portfolio, we really needed more people, and we needed people who were really good at those core team roles. I really think in the next couple of years, with the additional workforce, you're going to see a big change in terms of the consistency in the way we deliver leasing projects.
And I'll jump in from the facility side. So as I mentioned at the start, we've got about 2,100 people in the organization. A little more than 40% of the PBS workforce manages buildings or goes out and inspects leases. Really ensures that you're getting what you're paying for in your rent. It costs us about $2 billion to operate and maintain, clean, to heat and cool, the space that you and your internal partners sit in every day. So for us, it's really important that we try to be as consistent as we possibly can in our interactions, not only internally, but with our customers as well. So facilities, we are identifying what the core functions are. What do we do? Where does it get done? Who does it? And we're looking to bring a lot more consistency to those types of questions, across the organization. Everything that we do, it has a cost to it. Whether we're doing it, whether our vendor partners are doing it, and as Stuart mentioned, a couple of times, Commissioners' focus is on mission and money, and so those choices that we make affect both of those things. And that's not to say that every interaction that you have with every facility manager, every lease administration manager across the country is going to be the same. It isn't. People have different personalities, different ways they interact with others. But what we want to bring that consistency to is the type of service that you should expect to receive from GSA, no matter if you're in region X, Y, or Z, dealing with one field office or another. And it is a challenge, across an organization as large as ours. And I don't want to leave you with the thought that it's something that you can just flip the switch and have it be done overnight. I think it is a process, but it's something that we're focused on and working towards.
I guess I'll touch on a few. Thank you, Andrew. One is I touched loosely on e-RETA and intake, but if you think in a more global sense of project management intake, we've never had this opportunity. If you think about how business has been done for the last 20 years at least that I've been with GSA, a lot of times these projects start, especially the smart ones, as a hallway conversation. Sometimes you send an email, right? You ring the phone, and sometimes a lot can get lost through that transaction. Times can, a great number of time can happen. And we've been talking internally about project management intake for years. We've set up what we call PMOs, but now with e-RETA and the work requests, the consistency is everyone will do the same process, right? That if you have a need, you enter that work request, and now you get a tracking number. And now you get some time with that too. And I see a kind of a leading question with that. That's a question part over here. Maybe I'll keep talking as he gets that real quick and then stop and get it. The other part is oversight. We have zone managers and zone directors internally at central office that work with the regions. So yeah, do you have a question on that?
Yes,
Thanks.
sir.
Sure.
Yes, sir. I've been using e-RETA for about 5 months now, finally getting a lot of the information in correctly or into the system correctly and getting it into being reviewed by our financial system.
Mm-hmm.
But what I'm seeing is until you have everything in, you get a RWA put out at the end. Many other organizations don't use e-RETA for their financial system and need to have a review of the documents that are actually part of the RWA or the information as part of the RWA. But there's no way of dropping it into a using organization's financial tracking system to be reviewed in part as a separate entity. Is there going to be a change to e-RETA so that there's a way of not just taking a screenshot and dropping the screenshot into another financial system to let other people make sure that we put the information in, because there's, you pull up a field and there's a couple thousand different choices. You may make the wrong one. Even in your own organization, there may be 4 or 5 pages of different choices in e-reader. They want to be able to review that before the RWA is finalized. And once we hand them 2957 that's printed out in e-reader, it can't be adjusted as a 2957. But they can give some feedback, if possible, to have a document, a draft, or an informational document produced by e-reader that can be put into the financial system to be reviewed, so that our system can be improved. Has there been any voice of that need?
There has, and that's a great point that you brought up. And it's kind of like getting into the next step of the maturity of being able to leverage work requests, if I can so say. So what we've discovered is through this process, kind of an unintended consequence, which is actually turning into an opportunity, is that a lot of our customers were taking our physical RWA form, and it sounds like maybe that's what was happening in your organization, passing it through different ranks and then getting it to the point,
That was the old
that was the old way, right. And so we kind of looked at that and said, hey, the opportunity is here is maybe you can actually use our system to do it. So to your point, we're working with our developers to try to build in some internal routing so that you could assign that and then have it internally routed to your folks. So that's a great point that you brought up. And then another opportunity again, that if we can create efficiency on your all end of how you used to do business and maybe not pass the paper around anymore, right? And use digital signatures so you have certain folks get routed. So thanks for bringing that up. That's certainly on our radar and a great opportunity. And I encourage you also, if you'd like to have more intimate conversations on that, to reach out to Ashley Carlson, my program manager in the Reimbursable team, and she'd be happy to look into that. She's back there. Look at that. You can even see her in person. She's on the back wall. Thanks, Ashley. And she's going to be talking a bit more about e-reader work requests in depth. I think the other point I just want to mention too, in the way of consistency, is training. We just recently did a lot of internal training to our folks across the country. We do this periodically, but also through the client enrichment sessions, we find that the same folks get it. So in an effort to have some consistency. And the other thing I just want to mention quickly is, I talked about the tools and consistency and policy. A few years back, if you looked at our RWA policy, we had 2 versions. We had the secret version, right, that we kept internal. And then we had the customer guide, which is kind of the cliff note, 30, 35 pages. And our lawyers said, why are we doing this? We're having to reconcile. And we said, what do you mean, just share our internal policy? And they said, sure, why not? Okay, you might have to change the wording. And we scratched our heads. And so the point here is that in the effort of consistency, when our RWA managers in particular look at the policy, or you look at it on the website and reference something, we're all singing from the same sheet of music. So it's just another example.
And I would just encourage you, I mentioned one of my hats here is customer engagement. If you see inconsistency in how we're delivering programs, in particular instances, please route that up through your account management group so that we can begin to see what those areas are, and was there a legitimate reason that we handled that transaction differently, in which case you're owed an answer, or is that an area that we need to focus on in terms of driving the consistent approach? And I saw a hand back there, yes.
Yes, thank you. Hi. My question is about the ratio of projects specifically to leasing project managers, which you addressed, saying that you have a goal to improve that ratio. So would you want to share with us today what is a current ratio of projects per leasing project manager and what your goal is to achieve? Thank you.
Sure. Is your question specific to a project type, like low, medium, high risk, or?
The large commercial building leases, actually.
So prospectus level lease,
correct.
high risk, say. 3 to 4 projects per project manager, lease contracting officer is really what we're aiming for. That they have the capacity, working with a broker and having the full complement of the core team. 3 to 4 prospectus level projects.
question about the strategic plan around owned inventory. This goes to proportion and timing. If you don't mind indulging, I want to oversimplify it a little bit so I can try to understand it. Let's say you have 100 buildings total, and I hear you saying you don't have enough resources to maintain them all the way you should. So you're going to sell some of them, right? And you're going to try to focus your resources onto fewer of them so that you can do them right. This is what we heard yesterday from the commissioner. He wants to focus on a few and do them really well. But of course, we're occupying all of them. So I guess if you could just say roughly, how many do you have to sell in order to be able to afford to properly maintain the rest of them, just out of curiosity?
We don't have a targeted number we're looking to sell. We just know that there are buildings in our inventory that are no longer core to our needs, or are beyond the point of are really realistically being able to invest in. We have some projects that come forward. By the time you do everything you would need to do in that building to totally rehabilitate it, we're upwards of $200–300 million. That's going to eat away most of our capital, a lot of our capital for any given year. Our goal is to do smart investment in a smaller number of buildings. I don't know if Flavio's got a number that he's trying to hit. We have a way of analyzing our portfolio to say this is a building that really doesn't need any investment right now. It's sort of on autopilot. Yeah, we've got work we could do in it, but we can probably manage that from a BA 54, budget account 54 perspective. We don't need to make a major investment. Or these are the buildings where we know we have some pretty significant investment. How do we tee those up and run them through our decision lens to get them queued up for a future appropriation? And these are the buildings that really are sort of beyond our needs or our ability to fix at this point.
Let me just touch a little bit on that. A lot of times, a building you still have a mission need, a housing need for that tenant. A good example is a project we just started this past Monday, the sale of the Hawthorne Federal Building close to LAX in Los Angeles. FAA was occupying the building. They still had a need to be in that market, but the seismic retrofit of the building was too costly for the government to invest in that asset. So we ended up moving FAA to a lease facility in that building. Now my group is going forward, engaging the private sector to sell the asset. The value in that asset is the huge parking lot in the back. So we're looking at how do you tap into that? What's the highest and best use of that asset? So that's where my group can help, is to come in and help you talk through some of those decisions and look at what are some of your alternatives. If you have the ability to retain capital from a legislative approach, there's a working group on the Federal Property Council. We're trying to push the ability for agencies to retain proceeds so you can make smart real estate decisions where you can tap into that equity and make investment afterwards.
Hi, I want to go back to consistency, if you don't mind. I'm DOI. I was at the forum last year. We talked about consistency. In the meetings that we have monthly meetings. We talk about consistency. I'm a GSA advocate, first of all. Let me say that. But I noticed that one region will say one thing, another region will say another thing. Yesterday, it came across my desk about redelegation. Okay, and I was going to bring it up in breakout session. But I noticed that every now and again, something is going to come across my desk where this particular region is saying they want all of this stuff where I never hear from other regions. So consistency, yeah, I don't want to be, dead horse, but that's something that I know with me at the DOI is really, really important, because when our contacts come up to my office, that means something's really going on. Okay, and our contact at GSA is absolutely marvelous, and we try to resolve the issue, but consistency, sometimes, and we know which regions we're talking about. Okay, I'm not going to say, but we know who they are. Okay, but consistency, yeah, we need to do something about that.
Noted. And again, I would advocate that you use our customer engagement group to get those issues elevated. There's not, it's a focus area for all the programs here to try to drive a consistent service delivery for you as customers. But I appreciate you letting John know this was handled this way. I like this answer that I got over here, but I didn't like this answer I got over here. So why are you giving me different answers for basically the same issue? Hold on, we have one back there.
Hi. GSA collects rent, and it goes into the federal buildings fund, and then you have to ask permission to spend it. Do you feel that your ability to get your obligational authorities for the monies that you collect from us is getting better? Because it sounds like from what you're saying, it's getting worse.
Of late, we have not received the full appropriation for the amount of rent that was collected. I don't know that it's getting worse. We are advocating for a full appropriation annually, and we give a pretty detailed accounting for how we would spend that money. One of the challenges we have within that particular line of our account is new construction. So sometimes a large new construction project will be put onto our plan for us and appropriated, and that takes away from some of the projects that we have going forward. But as I said at the outset, we know what our delta is right now. It's about $6 billion is the work that we need to undertake in the immediate term. And we know that over the past at least 3 or 4 years, we've been about $1 billion shy of the rent rolls. So I'm forever optimistic that we can turn the tide and get zero net, what we refer to as zero net budget authority, which means you've paid $10.2 billion in rent. The must pay of the leases and the management of facilities goes out the door, and we have the full balance there.
Good morning. My question is for Allison, and it's on cost avoidance on the leased inventory. And I'm wondering, does GSA have an audit process in place to evaluate your rentable usable ratios, operating expense increases, real estate tax increases, such that those savings can potentially be passed on through the rents? They're generally going to be nickel and dime savings, but Social Security Administration, we have about 1,500 leased assets, and so those would add up pretty significantly in terms of savings in our operating cost increases and the rents we pay against rentable square feet versus usable.
I actually think this is a pricing policy question. Where are you going? So, Stuart, where are you going? Literally. Do we have an audit process, I heard you say, and do we have the ability to pass those savings on to the tenant through the rent? Is that basically your question?
Yes.
All related to lease cost avoidance?
Yes.
Okay. So lease cost avoidance is really about reducing the RSF and negotiating rates at or below market, right, when we replace leases. So if there's your Social Security Administration and you might sometimes pay a different rate than other tenants in that space. So if taxes are adjusted annually, and so is your rent then, if there's a tax adjustment. Operating costs are also escalated annually, so is your rent. So in effect, you should be receiving any upward or downward adjustment. It should be reflected in your rent. If that's not happening, definitely we need to have a conversation. Sir, do you have a different?
No, in the lease market, it should be straight pass-through. So if we're able to negotiate a better deal, either through a reduction in size or free rent should be passed on to you as a customer if we've negotiated that. below market rate should be direct pass-through. Happy to have a more targeted discussion if you have a transaction that you saw a savings that occurred, should have occurred, but didn't get passed through.
Well, it's really more a question of whether or not there's an audit process in place, if it's a pricing question or a leasing question. Because when there are remeasurements, your rentable useful factor will change. And we pay a lot of money in that square footage difference between what our useful requirement is and what our rental charge is. And we really don't have a method to confirm or determine whether or not the rental costs or the rental square feet are in fact the actuals, especially as leasing changes over the term. And then in terms of the annual estimations for operating costs or real estate taxes, I understand how those are calculated. But again, does GSA have a process in place where they're auditing the lessor's escalations that they send to GSA to make sure that those real estate tax costs or operating costs are legitimate, instead of just, receiving a bill and paying it and passing it on to us?
No. So on the remeasurement of space changes, that definitely is an activity that goes on, a verification process before we actually issue the lease modification. And then you're right, the operating costs and real estate taxes are based on what we occupy. The operating costs, once, assuming that that's correct, the square footage is correct, and the operating costs as negotiated in the rent are correct, that is what's going to be escalated. We don't ask for receipts or anything like that, and I guess we could do an audit, but I don't necessarily know why we would, because we negotiate based on what that lessor tells us his costs are. Through a competitive process, he wins the lease. On the real estate taxes, they have to submit their tax bill, so it is their actual bill that they're receiving, and that's how we adjust. And we can easily look that up if there's any question on whether that bill is accurate or not.
Hi, this message is for Keith. Keith, you mentioned express menu as something that is kind of meant to more expedite RWAs, especially for smaller projects. Does GSA have something on their website or somebody who I can connect to get more information related to that?
Yeah, no, great question. We haven't started the kind of formal external outreach, but we will soon, and again, through our client engagement sessions. In addition to that, too, quick commercial, I'm working with Eric Fulton on Stuart's team that does amazing outreach, and we'll have a kind of concise sheet on all these reform initiatives that I just mentioned earlier, with the express menu being one of them. Thank you.
Yeah, hi. I work for the Federal Aviation Administration, and my question is more about environmental compliance. On the seismic, where do I escalate? How do I escalate this issue so that we can validate that all these buildings are, in fact, compliant to certain standards?
So that's really my office that manages all of our environmental and safety policies. So I'm happy to work with you and get my team engaged as well. We could talk after this session's over. You can work with your national account manager on Stuart's team and make sure we get the right people in the room to answer your questions.
Okay, one more. We have one more time for one more
Okay,
question.
time for one more.
All right. So I want to go back to disposal for a second. So there is a cost to the agency when you push us out into lease space and TI RWAs and things that we have to come up with. So my question is, you mentioned that the money that you get from the disposals is going to go back to the board for use in future disposals. Is any of that money going to be available to the agency, similar to like the consolidation funding was, to cover some of those costs that the agency bear in moving back out into lease space?
Great question. I think that issue will be debated by the board, but that's exactly how I feel it should play out, where agencies that are putting projects forward, the board is very interested in having discussions with agencies to really identify projects that might be sitting there for a while, that might need an injection of capital to be able to move that final component, that final mission need, to be able to prep the property for sale. And then, since those funds will go back to the board, that said, those funds would have to be reappropriated to the board. But the board then will decide on a package on how they want to utilize those funds. So I think there could be a discussion that says, if we put this project forward, can you help us fund a consolidation effort on this project for in year 2 or year 3? But the key is that first year for you to be able to generate those dollars. Right now, the board only has $5 million to spend on projects. As you all know, $5 million isn't getting you anything.
Well, I will apologize if we didn't get to your question in this session, but it's an open dialogue. It's a day of open dialogue, so feel free to grab most of us. We have a lot of folks on my team and others around interactive conversations today. If you have a one-off that you want to have, please grab one of us in the hallway. I mentioned our commissioner couldn't be here, got pulled away, but we're fortunate to have Michael Gelber, who's the deputy commissioner. I was happy that he was here to hear the question about consistency and delivery. I know it's a hot topic for him. We need to get these chairs down. So without further ado, let's go. Thank you.
Stuart, maybe I can pull that. Are either of these on? And the folks in the back here? Good. Okay. Sorry. People always ask me, why do I wear a tie every day? Today's the day. Today's that day. So I apologize that the commissioner could not attend, and I was asked to speak on his behalf. So it's my pleasure to welcome you all today. I know Stuart had some welcoming remarks earlier this morning, and from what I understand, Stuart referenced D-Day, which is kind of a day on all our minds today because of the 75th anniversary. So obviously, I think Stuart acknowledged the service of those who have served, and my assumption, though, is none of us here were at Omaha Beach 75 years ago. And so the question is, what does this mean for us? And as I was thinking about it this morning, not because I was going to be speaking here, but I was just watching the TV, I was kind of thinking about the words on the Lincoln Memorial about the Gettysburg Address, where our job for those who weren't there is to take care of those who were, the orphan, the widow, those who served, but also to ensure that they didn't die in vain. And I think even a meeting like this, which may not feel particularly significant, and definitely not as significant as Omaha Beach, is important in its own way, because it's a way for us to continue what those men did that day. So, as I said, I know this is just a government meeting. We're going to ask questions. Hopefully we'll learn from each other. But in some way, it pays a very small way, kind of honor to those who served that day, died that day, because they're kind of continuing, we're continuing what they gave their lives for. So again, thank you for being here. Thank you for those who served. And I'll go through Dan's presentation. As I read the speech, if I reference him in some way that he was referencing himself, I apologize. But the goal is to really talk about his significant initiatives and the initiatives that we are at the Public Building Service very much engaged in. So. Thanks. So our goal is to meet your facility needs, your mission needs, your space needs at the least possible cost to the taxpayer. We are all taxpayers, and obviously there are other hundreds of millions of other taxpayers working to provide us the funds to provide for this space, and we don't want to spend more than we need to. So we have 3 significant initiatives, and you see them hopefully on the screens around the room, and I understand there's some folks listening on audio, perhaps in another room, and I'm not sure how the connection is. But the first one I want to talk about is the least cost avoidance. As many of you have heard, GSA's budget, PBS's budget, it's about $10 billion a year. Sometimes we get a little more, sometimes a little less. as was referenced in the last couple of years, we've been getting a little less. Of that 10 billion or so, 5 billion, goes to leases. So a huge portion of our income that we collect from you, other agencies, goes to the lease inventory. And the more we spend on leases, the less we can spend on other issues. And so our goal is to try to ensure that when we enter into leases, we are spending the least amount of money. We want to make sure we have the most competitive procurement, and sometimes that's the challenge. Because many agencies are, for lack of a better term, comfortable, want to stay in the place they're in. Because moving is a problem. Moving can be expensive. It was referenced the move and replication costs and TI costs that are incurred. But what we've seen is the vast majority of our leases are 5, I think the average lease term is about 6 years. And the amount of time we spend in a leased building, that building that we've leased for 5 to 6 year term, is about 26 years. So we have run through 3, 4, 5 lease procurements for the benefit of staying in one place. So our goal is to work with you early, for a large project, identify what your program requirements are, ensure that we have the most competitive possible procurement, and work to get the longest possible lease term. That allows stability for you, so you know you're not going to be moving or potentially moving every 5 years. It truthfully also allows stability to the landlord, because what that landlord sees is an opportunity to have an anchor tenant for a significant amount of time. They're willing to provide us a better deal. There's benefits to them. If you have a major tenant in a building, you can begin to wrap around commercial establishments, retail establishments that could support that. There's a greater appeal to the commercial marketplace for that. So as we're looking at that lease in the long term, one of the things we want to do as we're renewing many of our leases now is to improve your utilization rate. And this is the topic of, the minute somebody from GSA says this, everybody now assumes that I'm going to lose my corner office. And the reality is you may be losing your corner office. But the reality also is that you probably are not spending a significant portion of your day in that office. And what we've seen across the country is large portions of space that we lease aren't being fully utilized. And one of the things we'd like to get much better at and work with you on is to find out how many people actually use your facilities, the facilities you occupy, on a daily basis. What are the counts of the people who come in and out? You are all here today. The spaces we rented for you, we're still paying rent for. And if you're the only person that space was assigned to, that money is not being used as effectively as it could. And I know there's exceptions around the edges for everything I say, but I do think that for the core issue, we need to become more efficient at how we use our space. And to do that, we need to get a better sense of how many people are actually in the building. This facility has a PAC system, a physical access control system. People swipe in and swipe out. On any given day, the highest percentage occupancy we get, the most, is about 60%. So 100 seats, 40 of them are empty. That is why many of you may be aware we're looking to move our National Capital Region, which is located across town at 7th and D in a federally owned building, into this facility to improve the utilization of this building. And then, if we're able to get the money from Congress, we will renovate and retrofit that facility so we can then bring a federal agency that's currently located in lease space into that building. And so the benefit of that kind of tiered activity is we're fully utilizing our own inventory and we're minimizing our leased inventory. And the dollars, as I said, are significant. Next 5 years, we have about $60 billion worth of lease transactions that are currently in place. So I think we have an example here. So that's the lease there. And here you have an example, the environment EPA in Denver. We went through a new lease procurement for them. EPA is saving $67.5 million. That's a rent bill they're not getting. And you can see the reduction in space, it's about a quarter, and the term is about 15 years. So EPA has the benefit of being in that space for a much longer period of time. And truthfully, it doesn't have to interact with GSA for 15 years at some level. You don't have to run through 3 leasing procurements. You're just in one. Okay, switching to our federal inventory, as was talked about, we're looking at those buildings that are used. And when I think of those, and I know many folks here are based in Washington, D.C., I think of 26 Federal Plaza in New York City. I think of the Kluchinsky building in Chicago. I think of the Denver Federal Center in Denver. And I think of the 450 Golden Gate in San Francisco, or the Wilshire facility in Los Angeles. And if I've missed your city or missed your building, I apologize, but I just want to give you a sense. These are massive federal facilities. The Atlanta Federal Center, huge complexes. And we are better served when we can invest in those buildings to ensure their systems are up to date, and that we also then have as many federal employees as possible assigned to those buildings and out of lease space. And that is a significant part of our work at GSA. And here's an example. Again, this is the USDA in Denver again. They moved into the federal center, so it's a move from lease space to federal space. It's a $1.5 million rent bill reduction, and they cut their space in half. They're still able to do their work. The reality is, I started with GSA 30-some years ago. Very different environment. Everybody had a desk. We were one of the first offices to have our own computers. That was a big thing. It used to be people shared computers. Now we all pretty much have laptops, so we're moving towards laptops. And the ability to have that, the ability to just walk around with your desk has changed how we treat real estate. And we need to begin to change how we view the use of space very differently, because technology has changed dramatically, and we're able to work so differently. And here's Flavio was talking about the FASTA effort, and there was some, as I was hearing the conversation, I didn't want to give a sense that, well, while you're here, we're sending you a notice back at the office that we're moving you out and you're going to sell your building for great savings for the government. That's not the intent here. There's hundreds of federal facilities that have been either vacant or underutilized or unutilized for quite some time, and the challenge is to move them to the process of disposal. And one of the underlying challenges of disposal is really that there's no benefit to the agency to take a property off their books. There's a lot of work to do that. You have to go through the screening processes, you have to engage in a variety of levels. And at the end of the day, you don't really see the money, so the effort, there's a disincentive to be involved in the effort. So the goal of the FASTA board is to be more fully engaged in identifying those properties that people have been talking about for years and selling them as quickly as possible for the benefit of the country. And here's an example in Bedford, Massachusetts. This property was a reported excess 20 years ago. We were finally able to put it on the market and through an auction, and it's fascinating to watch these auctions. They're online. You can just, if you're a GSA employee, you're not allowed to participate. Everybody else can feel free. You can watch them kind of ratchet through as the auctions occur, as people go back and forth to bid on properties that we may not have thought were worth much at all. And this property, which was costing us the government money, sold for $9 million. And that's really what the FASTA board is looking at, what Flavio's team is looking at on a regular basis. And the final activity that we're looking at is how do we get all this work done? I think there was a question, a woman was behind the column, I think when she asked it, what's the ratio of project managers to projects, and how are you going to, consistency, how do we ensure, there was a question in front about consistency, how do we get all this stuff done? And what we're looking to do is we realize we need to hire more people, and we're working with the Office of Management Budget, we're working with Congress to say, when we do bring on more people, we have better results, we're able to complete more work, and as a result, we can provide you better service. So we're looking to hire more project managers, more lease contracting officers, more contracting officers to get this work done. We're also looking to contract for work that we may have historically done ourselves, or maybe not done at all properly because we don't have the resources to do. So we're looking to do that, and hopefully, and we've seen some early results in terms of savings by how we procure the various supplies. Some of it's very basic. In Washington, D.C., we'll have multiple contract scopes of work for the same task, and we find out it's the same firm we're contracting with, but they still had to read 3 or 4 different statements of work. So simple things like cleaning that up, and I think one of the big changes that GSA has seen over the last couple of years is the ability to use computers and technology to begin to aggregate that data and to begin to see where the anomalies are. Why does this building cost more to maintain than another building, relatively the same size, same geographic area, but one costs a little more to operate than the other? The tenant satisfaction score is dramatically different from one to the other. Why is that? And we're beginning to use that type of information to overlay with technology to get better at how we do things. There were questions about the new RWA processes and how we're trying to make that system more electronic. And with any system, there's always struggles with you think we've covered every base, but then you're using an operating system or a different computer that somehow interacts with ours slightly differently. So we need to work through all those issues, and we definitely encourage you to kind of raise your hand, send that email, ask the question about why isn't this working the way it should. But once we kind of iron out those various challenges, the goal is to be just more efficient. The RWA is no longer sitting on somebody's desk who happens to be on a 2-week vacation in August, or in September at the end of the fiscal year, which creates lots of consternation. The goal is with the electronic system, everything is tracked, everything is input. There are no questions about where it is and who should be doing something with it. But like everything else, that takes time and it takes money. And the money needs to come from Congress. And so as we work through these processes, we are definitely very focused on hiring more people in these key areas and developing additional enhancements in our technology so that the people we hire aren't keying in data, but they are focused on you, the customer, and the American people. My sense is that is it for the slides. And so, I don't know, was there an opportunity to do, so I don't know if Dan was going to do this, but I'll do it. We'll see how it goes. If anybody has any questions about what I said, any concerns or thoughts about where GSA is going, otherwise, we can break and I guess go on to the next thing. But I'll just open the floor to see if anybody has any thoughts. No? Okay. Well, thank you all very much for coming today. Make sure it's a valuable day. And going back to kind of what we're sort of honoring today across the country, their sacrifice is sort of part of all of us, and we have an obligation moving forward. So ask the question, make sure we're doing the best job we possibly can for you, and at the end of the day, that just makes the country a better place. Thank you all very much.
So we're at the first break in our agenda. We're going to try to do the best we can to stay on a rigid time schedule today because we got a lot of stuff. We cut a lot of stuff out of the agenda. We were putting it together. I think we queried you about what topics did you want to hear about. We had to sort of synthesize that to be able to get everything in that we wanted to today. I would encourage you between now and 10:15, which is when your breakout sessions are going to start, to grab one of us if you have a question you didn't get answered. Plenty of PBS folks here in the room, or network among yourselves. Feel free to take a look at the vendor stations that we have out in the atrium here. The 2 breakout sessions are across, literally right across the atrium here, and one of the breakout sessions will be here, and you can check your agenda to figure out which room you might want to be in. Again, thank you for coming today and spending time with us, and as Michael said, make sure that it's productive for you. That's why we do this. So thank you, and we'll break until 10:15. Yeah.